Hello, chess fans! This is Rick from Chess to Impress with number 148 in this series, Viewers Games. If you would like your game to be analyzed on Chess to Impress, then you can send it to me by email to classroomchess64@gmail.com. It is the turn of Vivek, and Vivek played a 5-minute game on Lichess. Vivek went under the name of J4IN2 with a rating of 1391, and his opponent was Linesman39 with a rating of 1940, so Vivek was outrated by 550 points. Vivek is a man of few words. I asked him for some words about himself so I could introduce him to you, but he didn't reply, and also when he sent me his game, he just sent the link to the Lichess game without any words. But that is okay, we will still look at the game. I'm not even 100% sure if Vivek is white or black in this game, but I'm pretty sure he's white, and we'll see why. So let's assume Vivek is outrated here by 550 points and he has the white pieces. And he played e2, e4 on the first move, c7, c5 from his opponent, playing the Sicilian, and we see the main line of the dragon. d4, c takes, knight f6, and here knight c3 is the main move. The pawn on e4 has to be protected. Also f2, f3 is played sometimes, that is the second most popular option, but Vivek plays bishop d3 to protect his pawn that way. g6, as said, we have the dragon. Now knight c3, bishop g7, and bishop e3. Protecting the knight to take any tactical shots with knight takes e4 out of the position, which would then attack the knight on d4. Bishop e3 is not necessary. You can also, instead of that move, castle, because that tactical shot that I mentioned, knight takes e4, taking a pawn and attacking the unprotected knight, can be answered by bishop takes e4. Black has blundered a piece because now suddenly the knight is protected by the queen. Anyway, bishop e3 is a fine move. Black castled, queen d2, and now knight g4, and that wins the bishop pair, which is a small success for black. Bishop e3 cannot play, as then the knight on d4 would be hanging. So h3 was played by Vivek, and black gained the bishop pair. Queen takes and queen b6. Another good move with a double attack. The knight is now attacked twice and only defended once, and at the same time black attacks the b2 pawn. Vivek finds a way out. He plays knight d to b5. That knight is now no longer hanging on d4, and also queen takes b2 is no longer an option. But black can take on e3 with check, ruining white's pawn structure. Knight c6 developing, and here the engine gives castling queenside, protecting the b2 pawn and putting the rook on a nice open file, half-open file. But after knight c6, Vivek played another logical move, knight d5. It does cost a pawn on b2, and black took it, attacking the rook, rook b1 attacking the bishop, and bishop back to g7. Black has won a pawn. But now it's white's turn. Knight bc7 attacking the rook in the corner, rook b8 and bishop b5. Vivek has done quite well and has activated his pieces at the expense of a pawn, and black has to be careful here. The best move, as indicated by the engine, is bishop d7 here. It gives the pawn back. This is the main line. Knight takes e7 check. You have to take, and then the bishop is unprotected on d7, so white wins the piece back. Rook fd8 and bishop a4, and black plays a6, and white has his pawn back, but black still has a small edge. White's pawn structure is what we call the dentist dream. Lots of spaces between the pawns. White has 4 pawn islands, and black only has 3 pawn islands, and in general, the player with less pawn islands has an advantage. But after bishop b5, black did not find the best move, which was bishop d7, as we just saw. He played e6, and that is not as strong a move, because now Vivek only has one move, but he found it. Bishop takes c6, very strong. You cannot recapture on c6, because then this rook is hanging, and you can take it straight away, but even stronger is to play knight e7 check first, and then after king h8, then take on b8. And white is a full rook up. So after bishop takes c6, played by Vivek, black did not recapture on c6, he took on d5. Bishop takes d5, and Vivek has his pawn back, and black has trouble completing development. He played b6 to develop his bishop on the long diagonal. Vivek castled. Bishop h6 was played, attacking the pawn on e3. And now Vivek plays a bad one. He played rook f to e1 to protect that pawn on e3, and that is an ouch move. That move hurts your eyes. It really is not a move you want to make. Most of the time, protecting a pawn with a rook in this passive manner is not good. There's always exceptions, but most of the time you really don't want to put your rook on e1 here, just to protect an unimportant pawn. What Vivek could have played instead is quite spectacular. He could, instead of rook fe1, he could have done something much better with that rook. Rook takes f7 is a move here. And if you recapture, there is rook f1, and we see that the rook on f7 is pinned. So you're going to win your rook back. The variation that the engine gives continues as follows. Bishop takes e3 check. Yes, you can take that pawn. King steps aside. Bishop b7 to complete your development. And then white can win the rook back. King h8, and the position is about equal. Very nice variation. So in this position, rook takes f7 is possible. Rook fe1 was played to protect the e3 pawn. If you really want to protect that pawn, then play rook f3. At least it is more active on the half-open f-file. But okay, rook fe1 was played. Bishop b7 from black. Vivek decided to swap that bishop and played knight d5, and that knight is white's prized possession. It's on such a beautiful square and cannot be challenged by pawns, cannot be challenged by the bishop, which is of the dark squares, and the only way black will ever be able to get rid of this knight is by sacrificing an exchange. This is really a wonderful piece. Black saw that bishop on h6 is not doing much, so he played it back to g7, rook f1, activating that rook, and rook c8. Rook f2 from Vivek, protecting his c2 pawn, rook c4, and rook e2. Ouch again! The big takeaway from this game is to try and avoid playing passive rook moves. This rook is now such a bad piece on e2. I talked before in this series about talking to your pieces, and if Vivek would have had a conversation with his rook on e2, the rook would have told him that he's not happy at all on that square. Why did you put me on e2? I do not want to be there. I'm a rook. I want to be on open files. I want to roam free and not protecting unimportant pawns from behind. Black took on e4, rook b4, and a pair of rooks was swapped. Knight takes back and rook c7. Black understands that rooks want to be on open files or half-open files. The knight returns to d5, that beautiful square, attacking the rook, and the rook went to c5, attacking the knight, and rook d2, protecting the knight. Black is a healthy extra pawn, but will have to show good technique to bring the point home. And both players had about 2.5 minutes left on the clock in this 5-minute blitz game. Rook a5 from black, attacking the a2 pawn, and Vivek protects it with c4. The rook is now protecting the a-pawn, and the knight is protected. c4, good move. Rook a4, black keeps harassing white's pawns. And rook c2, another passive rook move, but in this case white really had no choice. There was no active alternative, and you can't keep letting black take your pawns. White has to hang in there and hope that black will not have the endgame technique to win this position. He played bishop h6, king f2, Vivek is going to activate his king, and king g7, king f3, and f5. g4 from Vivek, good move. When you're defending an endgame like this, It's always good to swap pawns. In the most extreme situation, you can swap all the pawns. Then give up your knight for the last pawn and defend rook and bishop against rook, which is a theoretical draw. So swapping pawns is good for the defending party. F takes, check, H takes, King F7, King E4, and B5. Using the pin of the C pawn, white cannot take because the C pawn is pinned. Vivek gave a check to the king, and black has to be careful. If you go to E6, then white gets great counterplay with rook F6 check, King D7 only move, and rook F7 check. Great counterplay for white here. The white rook has most definitely come to life in this variation. Just compare that rook with the passive position it was in before. So after rook F2 check, black wisely did not go to E6, he went to G7. Rook C2, saying to black, show me how you will win this. B takes C4, King D4, white will win the pawn back. King F7, rook takes C4, and this is the most important point in this game. What black should have done here, he should have realized that white is threatening to create a lot of counterplay against his king, and he should have got the rooks off the board. King takes with good winning chances for black, and very importantly, about 0 losing chances for black. But in this position, black decided after 3 seconds of thought to take on A2, winning a second pawn, but allowing all 3 white pieces to become very active, which is enough for a draw. The move took him 3 seconds. He had misjudged the implications of taking a second pawn. Because now Vivek played rook C7 check, King G8 and knight F6 check. And black has to be careful. Don't go into the corner. Why not? Yes, indeed. This is checkmate on the board. So after knight F6 check, black went to F8 with the king, the only other option. And now Vivek could have gained a draw with knight takes H7 check. And that will lead to a move repetition. You have to play King G8, and then there is knight F6 check, King F8, knight H7 check, and that is a draw. Because in this position you cannot go to E8, because then there is the move G5 that wins a piece. The bishop can only go to F8, but then it is still lost after rook C8 check, King E7, and knight takes F8, and Vivek is winning here with his extra piece. So all this after King F8 was played in the game, and then knight takes H7 check, which would have gained Vivek a draw. But he made a mistake here. He took on H7 with the rook. It looks strong, but now there is bishop G7, which was not found by black. But this cuts off the white rook, and black is winning again. But in the game, black did not find bishop G7. He played rook A4 check. And that forces the white king to a more active position. You don't want to help your opponent making good moves. King D5, that king is stronger on D5 than on D4. And now bishop G7 should still have been played, but now the position is about equal. White's pieces are so active that it is enough compensation for the pawn. But after King D5, bishop G7 was not found by black, and he made the losing blunder. He took on E3. And black is again 2 pawns up, but now there is a forced checkmate on the board for white. Black had 49 seconds left and played this losing blunder after 6 seconds. It's never easy when the clock is ticking down. Vivek had more time on the clock. If you want to put the video on pause and see how white does win here, you can look for yourself. Vivek found it. He played King E6, and now rook, knight and king are too strong for the black king. The threat is rook F7 checkmate, and there is no way out for black. Black played D5, and Vivek checkmated his opponent on move 46. Well done, Vivek, beating an opponent rating 550 points above you. You were outplayed from the opening, but grabbed your chance when it was there to get back into the game by activating your pieces. Then black outplayed you again in the endgame. but when the clock was ticking down, your opponent went for a second pawn, which once again allowed you to activate your pieces, which would have gained you a well-deserved draw. A final blunder from Linesman 39 allowed you to even win the game with a nice checkmate finish. It's quite clear Vivek was white in this game. I don't think many viewers would send in a painful defeat against a much lower rated player. Well done Vivek, and thank you very much for sharing this game. I hope you enjoyed Vivek's adventure in this game. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you liked the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter and on Facebook. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.